Stop explaining yourself. Start becoming yourself. Have you ever caught yourself over-explaining why you are the way you are? Why you made that decision? Why you walked away? Or why you didn't fit someone's idea of enough? The truth is, the more you explain yourself, the less you become yourself. Because the moment you start performing for approval, you stop living for truth. Life isn't about convincing others to understand you. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to be understood. We live in a world that constantly teaches us to explain ourselves, to justify every choice, every feeling, every boundary. From childhood, we're trained to make sure people understand us before they'll accept us. But here's the problem. The more you chase understanding from others, the less you understand yourself. You begin to measure your worth by how well your actions are received, not by how aligned they are with your truth. Validation becomes a quiet addiction. You tell yourself you're just clarifying, just making peace, but deep down, you're asking for permission to be who you are. And when your identity depends on external approval, your inner peace starts to crumble. The truth is, validation is a distraction, a beautifully disguised trap. It keeps you talking instead of transforming. You explain to feel seen, but what you really crave is acceptance. The moment you start explaining why you're different, why you walked away, why you chose peace over drama, you've already given away your power. Because the people who truly get you don't need an explanation, and the ones who demand one will never be satisfied. You could explain your heart 1,000 times, and they'd still hear only what fits their narrative. So why waste your energy defending something that doesn't need defense? When you constantly explain yourself, you stop living in your truth and start performing it. You rehearse what to say, how to say it, and how it might sound to others, all while losing touch with what you feel. That's not communication, that's self-negotiation. Every time you explain your worth, you subconsciously question it. You don't owe the world your reasoning, you owe yourself your authenticity, because every minute spent explaining who you are is a minute stolen from becoming who you're meant to be. Once you step back from that need to be understood, you begin to see things differently. You realize that growth doesn't need applause, healing doesn't need validation, peace doesn't need explanation. You don't have to talk people into seeing your value. Your consistency, your energy, and your evolution will do that for you. People may misunderstand you at first, but that's okay, because your goal is no longer to be understood, it's to be free. When you stop explaining, you finally start living. You no longer bend to fit anyone's expectations. You reclaim your time, your silence, and your self-respect. And in that quiet space, you meet the most powerful version of yourself, the one who doesn't need validation to feel whole. When you stop trying to explain yourself, something powerful happens. Your silence begins to speak louder than any words ever could. Most people assume silence is weakness, that if you don't defend yourself, you've lost the argument. But real power doesn't argue, it observes. It doesn't chase understanding, it chooses peace. Silence is not an act of surrender, it's an act of strength, because it takes courage to stay quiet in a world that constantly demands explanations. It takes discipline to walk away knowing that your truth doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to be lived. There's a certain freedom that comes when you no longer need to justify who you are. You stop trying to win every misunderstanding. You stop replaying every conversation in your head, and you stop giving energy to people who are committed to misinterpreting your intentions. When you embrace silence, you begin to see that not every situation deserves your response. You learn to discern when to speak and when to let your peace do the talking. You realize that explanations often come from insecurity, while silence comes from self-trust. People will always have their own version of your story. Some will believe what they want, no matter how clearly you explain. But you must remember, you are not responsible for how others choose to perceive your life. You can't control their lens, only your response. And sometimes the best response is none at all. Because when you stop explaining, you stop feeding confusion. You start protecting your energy instead of defending your ego. You learn that calmness in the face of misunderstanding is one of the highest forms of emotional intelligence. When your silence is intentional, it becomes powerful. You no longer need to prove your worth through words, your energy starts to do it for you. People notice the shift, not because you explained it, but because you embodied it. Silence gives you clarity, dignity, and strength. It allows you to rise above the noise and focus on becoming instead of convincing. Because at the end of the day, silence is not emptiness. It's presence. It's self-control. It's the quiet confidence that says, I don't need to explain myself. I know who I am. Becoming yourself means letting go of every version of you that was created to please, impress, or belong. For years, most of us have been shaped by the expectations of others. Parents who wanted us to be safe, friends who wanted us to fit in, or society that told us what success should look like. Somewhere in that noise, we forgot who we truly were. We learned to edit ourselves, to say the right things, act the right way, and hide the parts that might make others uncomfortable. But every time you mold yourself to someone else's idea of acceptable, you move further away from your own identity. And that quiet disconnection is what creates the emptiness so many people feel today. The journey of becoming yourself begins when you stop apologizing for your evolution. It's about realizing that not everyone will recognize this new version of you, and that's okay. Growth means outgrowing certain roles, certain relationships, and certain ways of being. The people who truly love you will adapt. The ones who only loved your old self will fade away. You'll lose people who are attached to your comfort zone, but you'll gain yourself, your clarity, your peace, your truth. That's a trade worth making every time, because you were never meant to live small just so others could feel comfortable around you. The hardest part about becoming yourself is facing the guilt that comes with it. You'll question if you're being selfish for setting boundaries. You'll worry that people will misunderstand your silence as distance. But growth often looks like losing the version of you that always needed to explain, justify, and make everyone happy. You begin to realize that being yourself might cost you relationships, but not being yourself will cost you your soul. And that's a much higher price to pay. When you stop explaining yourself and start becoming yourself, you finally stop performing. You no longer chase approval. You attract alignment. You don't shrink to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You start choosing authenticity over acceptance, peace over popularity, and truth over comfort. The beauty of becoming yourself is that you no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. You simply live it. And that quiet authenticity, that unshakable self-awareness, becomes your greatest strength. Your energy tells the truth long before your words ever do. You can spend hours explaining your intentions, your values, your choices, but the people who truly feel your energy don't need your explanation. They see it, they sense it, they understand it in silence. That's the real beauty of becoming yourself. Your presence begins to communicate more than your mouth ever could. When you are aligned with who you truly are, you carry a calm, grounded energy that others can feel. You no longer convince people of your worth because your energy speaks for you, confidently, quietly, and clearly. The truth is, your energy doesn't lie. You can say you're at peace, but if you're constantly explaining yourself, justifying your actions, or defending your choices, your energy still screams insecurity. But when you stop over-talking and start living in truth, something powerful shifts. You become centered. You start making decisions that reflect your growth, not your fear. You move with intention instead of impulse. And people can feel that difference, not because you told them, but because your peace radiates, louder than your explanations ever could. Energy is the language of authenticity. When you are truly yourself, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your actions, your aura, your silence, they all align. You attract people who match your calm instead of your chaos. You start to value presence over performance, peace over persuasion, and you realize that explaining yourself was never your responsibility. Embodying your truth always was. The energy you carry will either speak for your healing or for your wounds, and that's why becoming yourself matters more than explaining yourself. Because the world listens to your energy before it ever listens to your words. When you start living this way, you stop needing to say, "This is who I am." People just know. Your boundaries are clear, your intentions are honest, your presence is felt. You no longer explain your worth. You embody it. That's the real transformation, when your energy becomes your language and your peace becomes your message. You realize that silence, confidence, and authenticity will always explain you better than your words ever could. That's the power of alignment, and that's what it means to become yourself. There comes a moment in your journey when you realize that. Constantly explaining yourself isn't bringing you closer to peace. It's pulling you further from it. You begin to see that no amount of words can make someone understand a version of you they've already decided not to see. That's when something inside you changes. You stop needing to be understood, and you start focusing on becoming understood by yourself. That shift from explaining to evolving is the moment your life begins to align. You realize that growth doesn't need noise. Transformation doesn't need validation. The more you try to explain your path, the less you walk it. But when you choose to become, you start living from a place of truth rather than approval. Becoming yourself means accepting that some people won't get it, and that's perfectly fine. You stop performing for applause and start acting out of authenticity. You stop being loud about who you are and start being present as who you are. When your energy becomes your language, you begin to notice how life starts responding differently. People who match your peace find their way to you. People who thrive on chaos naturally drift away. You no longer force connections or chase closure. You let your growth speak for itself. And the beauty of all this is how silent it feels. You don't wake up one morning with a trumpet sound announcing your evolution. You simply start showing up differently. Softer but stronger, calmer but more confident. You realize you no longer need to defend your boundaries because your energy already enforces them. You no longer need to explain your decisions because your peace justifies them. You've stopped convincing and started becoming, and that's what real freedom feels like. When you stop explaining yourself and start becoming yourself, you start walking in truth, not performance. You stop chasing understanding and start embodying clarity. You find peace in your silence and power in your stillness. You learn that the right people don't need your explanations, they need your example. So, stop over-talking your journey. Let your growth, your peace, and your presence do the explaining for you, because who you are becoming will always speak louder than anything you could ever say. When you finally stop explaining yourself and start becoming yourself, life begins to feel lighter, not because it gets easier, but because you stop carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. You no longer wake up wondering how to prove your worth, how to justify your choices, or how to make others see your value. You simply live it. You start showing up as the person you've always been underneath the noise, raw, real, unfiltered, and free. You learn that self-acceptance is the highest form of peace, and silence is often the language of strength. You stop fighting to be understood, because understanding yourself becomes enough. The journey of becoming yourself is rarely glamorous. It's messy, quiet, and often lonely. There will be moments when you doubt your path, when you question if you should go back to explaining just to feel seen again. But hold your silence, because that silence is not emptiness, it's evolution. It's where the noise dies and your truth begins to rise. The version of you that needs to explain is fading, and the version that simply is taking its place. That shift may scare people who only knew your old patterns, but that's not your burden to carry. You're not here to make them comfortable. You're here to grow. And with that growth comes clarity. You begin to see how unnecessary so many explanations were, how often you tried to translate your peace to people who were addicted to misunderstanding you. You realize that not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your emotions, or your energy. The world doesn't need your words, it needs your example. Your calm confidence will speak louder than your defense ever could. Your quiet strength will inspire more than your explanations ever did. Because when you stand in your truth, your energy becomes undeniable. It tells your story without you ever needing to open your mouth. So stop explaining who you are becoming. Just become. Let your silence speak your boundaries. Let your peace define your presence. Let your consistency prove your worth. You don't need to argue for your truth. Live it so boldly that even your silence commands respect. That's the power of becoming. When words fall short, your energy, your actions, and your authenticity tell the story for you. Because at the end of the day, who you are becoming is the only explanation you'll ever need. There comes a point in life where you realize that the constant need to explain yourself is not humility, it's fear. Fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or unseen. But growth begins the moment you stop chasing explanations and start embracing your evolution. The world doesn't need you to justify every decision. It needs you to own them. Because the more you explain, the more you dilute your truth. And when you stop defending who you are, you finally give yourself permission to become who you were meant to be. Freely, silently, powerfully. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop performing for approval and start living for alignment. You no longer seek validation from people who can't see your growth, and you stop apologizing for evolving beyond your old self. You begin to trust that your peace is more important than people's opinions. You realize that silence is not weakness, it's strength. It's the language of confidence, maturity, and emotional freedom. You don't need to tell people who you are. Your actions, your presence, and your peace already say it for you. Becoming yourself is not about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to who you've always been beneath all the noise. It's about peeling away the layers of fear, expectation, and approval seeking until only truth remains. And that truth doesn't shout, it glows. It doesn't demand to be heard, it's felt. The more you embrace that truth, the less you need to talk about it. You move through life differently, with quiet confidence, grounded energy, and a deep knowing that you no longer need to explain your worth. You simply embody it. So stop explaining yourself, stop defending your peace, your boundaries, your choices. Let your silence do the talking and your growth tell the story. The people meant for you will recognize your energy without needing an explanation. And those who don't never would have, no matter how much you said. Your evolution doesn't need an audience, it just needs your consistency. Become yourself fully, unapologetically, and quietly, because that's where real power lives. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I truly appreciate every single one of you who chooses to grow, evolve, and become more authentic every day. Remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your peace, your growth, or your boundaries. You owe yourself the freedom to live in truth. If this video inspired you or made you reflect, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Every bit of support helps spread these messages to more people who need them. Until next time, stay grounded, stay true, and keep becoming yourself. Because you don't need to explain your journey when you're living it.